For many people, starting a family can be pretty exciting, but it can also be challenging for some women that have inflammatory bowel disease who are considering becoming pregnant, and they may experience some confusion or fear about how their disease may impact the ability to have a healthy pregnancy. So joining us today is patient advocate Jessica Karen and Dr. Robinson. They're here to help answer some common questions that you may have about IBD. All right, now Jessica, we'll start off with you. What were some of your own concerns?
Well, when I was first thinking about starting a family, I wondered, would I even be healthy enough to become pregnant? And then what were some safe options for me and the baby in treating and managing my disease throughout the pregnancy?
And Dr. Robinson, for a woman that has IBD and believes that she's considering pregnancy in the future, what key steps would you urge her to take?
I think the first thing is to open a dialogue with her physician. Oftentimes that's a gastroenterologist. And so in other words, beginning to think about pregnancy means beginning to think about how am I going to navigate the process through managing my disease, but also having a healthy pregnancy, both of which are very important. And so we feel like it's really important to develop a team of physicians in planning that pregnancy and opening that dialogue early to begin discussing how that can take place.
Definitely. And Jessica, can you tell us a little bit about some of the tools that are out there to help women now?
Well, the toolkit on ibdparenthoodproject.org is great because it addresses some misconceptions that women may have and gives them the information to empower them to talk about those concerns with their clinician. And it also gives a great checklist to address some key areas of concern in preconception, pregnancy, and postnatal care, as well as breastfeeding.
And Doctor, what providers should women include with their IBD care?
Absolutely. So first of all, most women have a designated gastroenterologist or GI specialist that's managing their IBD care. They need to seek that person out and open that dialogue about thinking about starting a family, considering pregnancy. I think the next aspect is really to engage a high-risk pregnancy specialist, a maternal fetal medicine specialist. Maternal fetal medicine specialists have been trained in the management of medical disease during pregnancy, and they've had an additional training experience beyond that of just an OBGYN to assist in the monitoring and the development of that baby over the course of gestation. But they also answer questions like medication use in pregnancy, safety for those medications in pregnancy, and also looking at things like how the patient should be delivered and when that delivery should take place. They're really the quarterback for the pregnancy itself. So really you need a team of physicians working with the patient in planning that pregnancy. The key, however, and the hope for these women is the majority of women who have IBD can have a healthy pregnancy. And the key is really this planning step is so critical in that process.
Well, thank you so much, Doctor, and thank you, Jessica, for being here today. Can you tell our viewers where they can get more information?
They can get more information at ibdparenthoodproject.org.
Thanks so much, you guys.
Thank you.